Everything you wanted to know about animal sacrifices but were afraid to ask. Shalom, I'm the Messianic Torah dude, and this week's Torah portion is Vayikra. Vayikra comes to us from Leviticus chapter 1, verse 1, through chapter 5, verse 26. And the main focus of this week's Torah portion is outlining how all of the different sacrifices were made under the Levitical priesthood. We have instructions on how to sacrifice a bull and a goat and birds, and how to make grain offerings and fellowship offerings, guilt offerings, sin offerings. All of these different things are kind of explained and enumerated throughout these chapters. Now, the first thing we see as we look at all of these different types of sacrifices is that, especially in chapter 1, you've got basically 3 tiers of sacrifice. The first tier, the bull, is sort of the more expensive animal. It's a much larger animal, so it takes a lot more resources to feed and to care for. So this is sort of your sacrifice for the wealthy. Then you have your sheep or goat. This is an animal that's smaller, requires less resources to provide for, requires less land to take care of, less expensive, everything like that. And so that's kind of your sacrifice for the middle class. And then you have the sacrifice of just 2 little birds. Now, the thing about the birds is that they're very small. You can capture one. They're relatively cheap to take care of. And so you see this is the sacrifice for the poor, essentially. And what this teaches us is that the Lord doesn't expect something unreasonable from us. If you're rich and you can afford to sacrifice the bull, go ahead and sacrifice the bull. If all you can afford is a goat, go ahead and sacrifice a goat. If all you can afford is a bird, go ahead and sacrifice the bird. There's no requirement that this is what you have to give when you give a free will offering. Even in the sacrifices for specific things, there's often an exception made. It says, if you can't afford this, make this as a sacrifice. Going back to the story of Passover even, we see that if you can't afford a lamb or a sheep, then the idea is your neighbor should be willing to share with you. If you have more lamb than everybody in your house can eat, then you should share it with your neighbor. But it helps us to remember that the Lord doesn't put unreasonable demands on us. He doesn't expect more from us than we're able to provide. Okay, so I've got my W-2, I've got the 1099, I've got all of my receipts. Can you have my taxes for me by next Tuesday? The other thing that we see, looking at these sacrifices, is that they are completely destroyed. There's nothing left of them. You can't partially sacrifice a bull. You can't sacrifice half a bull and save the rest for later. First, the sacrifice is cut up into pieces. Then all of the pieces are completely burned up. The reason the Lord wants these sacrifices to be completely destroyed is it's a sign of total and complete devotion. In the same way the sacrifice is completely destroyed, we should be completely and totally devoted to the Lord. We should be 100% devoted to the Lord. And we can take solace in the fact that the Lord doesn't require from us a level of devotion that He hasn't in return, or in advance, I should say, already shown to us. The Lord doesn't expect us to be more devoted to Him than He is to us. What do I mean by that? In Romans chapter 5, verses 6 through 8, it tells us, "For while we were still weak, at the right time, Messiah died for the ungodly. For one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one would dare even to die. But Adonai showed His love for us, in that while we were still sinners, Messiah died for us." See, the Lord's love is not dependent on the good things that we do for the Lord. It's not dependent on what we deserve. The Lord loves us regardless. There's an old saying, the Lord loves you just the way you are, but the Lord loves you too much to leave you the way you are. And that's an important thing to remember. The Lord loves us warts and all, so to speak. But the Lord loves us too much to leave us with our warts. And of course, when we're talking about sacrifices or the sacrificial system, we have to talk about the ultimate sacrifice, which is Yeshua. You see, Yeshua fulfilled all of the sacrifices. He was the sin offering. He was the guilt offering. He was the fellowship offering. He was the perfect sacrifice. Now, in the days of the Levitical priesthood, people would offer sacrifices of bulls and goats and birds and things like that. But now, the sacrifices we offer are different. The rabbinic tradition is that now our sacrifice is the sacrifice of prayer. We offer our prayers up as sacrifice. And in this week's Torah portion, we see repeated over and over that the sacrifice is a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And it's important to remember that our prayers are a pleasing aroma to the Lord. But more than that, we also have Romans chapter 12, verse 1, which tells us, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of Adonai, to present your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to the Lord, which is your spiritual worship. Now, Rav Shaul is not telling us to actually put ourselves on the altar and cut ourselves up and burn ourselves, but rather to live lives of self-denial, and that is our act of worship. That is our act of sacrifice. When you give up something you want because you know that it would be displeasing to the Lord, or when you give up something that you want in order to devote yourself to pleasing the Lord, that is our modern form of sacrifice. Then we have Psalm 51, 15 through 17, which says, O Lord, open my lips, and my mouth will declare your praise. For you will not delight in sacrifice, or I would give it. You will not be pleased with burnt offering. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. Now what this psalm is telling us is that the true sacrifices to the Lord come from the heart. Think about with all of your other relationships. Imagine if you did something to please your wife, but didn't do it out of genuine love. Imagine how she would feel about that. Hey, honey, I got you some flowers.
Oh, wait. Is this because you love me or for your silly video?
What's the matter? You're getting flowers.
Okay.
Okay, maybe that's a bad example. But the Lord can see through to our hearts. And obeying the Lord is important, but obeying the Lord out of genuine love and out of genuine desire to please Him is more important. What are some things that you've sacrificed to please the Lord? What are some things that you've given up to live a life that honors the Lord? Let me know in the comments. And if we gave you a laugh, give us a like. And if you learned something, give us a share. I'm the Messianic Torah dude. Shalom, and stay in the Word.